Hey guys, I'm Colin Wright, and I'm going to answer some of your questions. How do you avoid being a yes man? Is saying yes to every job you're handed considered to be professional? There's not just a single answer to this question because everybody's circumstances will be different. The amount of work you've done in the past, the length of your CV or your resume, the amount of skill that you can just demonstrate right off the bat. It may be that you have a great amount of skill right out of school or without even going to school, in which case you don't need as much work history in order to prove yourself within some type of company or other institution. I would recommend in most cases to, particularly at the beginning of your career, say yes a whole lot. And even in some cases when you're not being paid, I know that ideally you are and you don't want to be taken advantage of, but particularly if you are doing work that allows you to amplify your skills, to gain new skills, to refine the ones that you have, to use them in a different setting. So if you know in theory how to use a particular type of software, but you've never used it in a real work environment before, and this is the opportunity to do that, I would say take that advantage of that opportunity to make connections, to build goodwill, even if it's something that you think might lead to a job or a particular type of work that you want to be doing. It's very much worthwhile in a lot of cases early on to put in that work. So in those cases, saying yes to work that you don't necessarily want to do, or that is not necessarily the best work that you should be doing in terms of payment or in terms of like it's grunt work or something, it's often very worth it because it shows that you're willing to work harder than everybody else. And that's something that is just an incredibly valuable skill. It's a valuable reputation, but it's something that is good for you to work on so that you don't feel that things should just be handed to you. I'm not saying that that's the case here, but it's very, very easy coming from a lifestyle where you're not working full time or where you've worked at relatively easy jobs and then moving into something where the expectations are much higher. It's easy not to adjust your work routine and your rituals along with that. And ideally, you are working like way harder than everybody else so that then everything seems easy. My experience leaving school and then going and working in the real world in LA was that I worked so much harder in school. I had like 2 majors, a bunch of minors, at one point like 5 jobs, and I started my first company in school. And so when I left school, the first like real job I took felt like very slow and was so easy and had all this extra bandwidth and time left over because I'd been working really hard and throwing myself into a bunch of stuff that wasn't always paying well or in some cases at all. So in those circumstances, I would recommend it for my approach to work anyway. Opinions might vary on that. There is a very good argument to be made that you should always be paid for everything that you do, or be paid extra if it is something that you would prefer not to do. But there's room for different opinions on that, I think. But to answer the second part of your question, I would say that it's not always expected, but it is almost always appreciated when you are willing to say yes more than no to the work that you're willing to do or the extra effort you're willing to put in. And again, the rewards that you get, whether they're monetary or otherwise, should guide you in figuring out how often to say yes and how often to challenge something. But in a lot of cases, if you're capable, then it's typically more worth your while to do it than not. As you grow in terms of your skills and in terms of what you know you can do and what you know you can do in a certain period of time, and your reputation within your space as well, you should become more picky because then you'll have more opportunities and you need to make sure that you are not spending your time here on something that's just kind of so valuable when you could be spending the same amount of time over here on something incredibly valuable for everybody involved. Then you should probably be more picky, but particularly at first. It's not expected, but it's usually appreciated. And the second question today, could you talk about your writing habits? How did you develop your voice? How often or not do you write every day? And do you keep a journal? So my writing habits are lacking. That's not to say I don't write. I write a lot, but I don't have any particular habit because for the last 7 years during which I became a professional writer, I haven't been able to maintain really any habits because I've been in different countries all over the world for that duration of time. And so consequently, I know a lot of people who have really great, very impressive, like somewhat rigid routines where they sit down at a certain time every day and write. That works really well for them. Me, I've grown up as a writer now as somebody who can work in kind of any circumstance, but I know kind of roughly what gets me into the right zone and roughly how much time it takes me to do things, so I can kind of write whenever, wherever. So when I do write, I tend to like sit and get it done. And then sometimes I'll go for long periods of not writing at all. So there's like no right or wrong way to do this, as with most things, but figuring out what your rhythm is and figuring out what type of environment you work best in, and if it's best to have coffee, or if it's best to be drinking water, or if it's best to do it in the dark, or to do it in a public space, or to do it perfectly alone with background music, with perfect silence. Figuring out those types of environmental variables really helps a whole lot. And it could be that one of those variables is doing it at the same time every day or writing the same number of words every day. I don't do that. Sometimes I'll sit and write an entire book in a weekend because I've been thinking about it for ages, and at that point I just need to sit and type it. And then sometimes it'll take months and months because I need to really micromanage every little detail and make sure that everything connects well. Typically, I don't allow myself to sit down and write until I've got it figured out. So that's my habit, I guess, the one fairly consistent habit, if you can consider it that. But beyond that, I don't know that you really need habits so long as you eventually get around to writing. And a lot of people skip that step. I've spoken about this before on another video, but a lot of people talk a lot about writing and think a lot about writing and get involved in writer culture and really like dive deep into that pool, but never get around to writing. And the most important habit to be in when it comes to writing is to write from time to time. It may be regularly, several times a day, it may be for long durations, it may be just here and there written down on a little notepad, but however you do it, write. That's the most important thing. And then how did you develop your voice? That's something that I think only comes with time. I am sure that they are teaching this somewhere. I didn't go to school for writing, so I don't know, but I'm sure that somewhere they're teaching people really cool techniques that I don't know about for developing your voice. For me, my voice came from writing a lot. And you write a lot and you kind of see how it works. You see what you like about the finished product. You see what other people like or don't like about it. You filter out most of the feedback, and then you take some of the good stuff that tells you things that are really worth considering, and then you slowly but surely evolve. And the more you write, the faster you evolve, and the more you're willing to change the way that you do things, the faster you evolve. But probably most important is making sure that you don't take all of the criticism, that you don't change everything just because somebody else says that you should, that you correct things when it makes sense because you want to be breaking rules intentionally as much as possible. You don't want to do it accidentally, you want to very intentionally break rules. And then you try to maintain something of your voice from when you wrote naively. And what I mean by that is that today my written voice sounds very different from the way that I wrote when I started blogging 7 years ago, for example. But there's elements of it that are the same. And what I've done is I've like honed and sharpened those into things that work much better than before, but they are still representative of the way that I communicate latently. And if you can do that, if you can find stuff that, like not having worked on it at all or barely having worked on it, if you can find some of the stuff that makes you you, and sharpen that and refine it and keep it, and then cut away some of the other stuff that distracts from that, then you are in the best possible shape. Let's see, and the last part of that question was, do you keep a journal? No. I do carry a sketchbook most places I go, but usually that's just for doodling. I'll write sometimes along with the illustration, but it's usually not just for writing. I do from time to time carry a little notebook, just a little very small notebook I can slip into my pocket. And I'll carry that in a pen, and then I'll go, as I'm traveling, write a page. So like a very small page just describing what's going on around me, and just as an exercise to keep myself thinking in that way of noticing things and experiencing the world kind of like a narrator. but it's not something that I'm intending to publish. It's not something that's like a set of exercises. It's just kind of a way of opening myself up so that I experience things in a certain way. So it's practice of a sort, but it's not journaling in the sense of here's what I did today, and it's not professional at all. The stuff that's in there is very crude usually, but it serves the intended purpose. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a like, you can subscribe to my channel, you can leave a comment below, you can ask a question for me to answer in a future video if you would like to. You can find out more about me and my work at colin.io. My blog is exilelifestyle.com. My podcast is letsknowthings.com. And you can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Colin is my name. To be professional.